there is always an element when Conte goes or any manager goes of, was he pushed or did he quit, or which one was it? I think to an extent there is this a weird idea that Antonio Conte was pushing for a push and then Spurs really had no choice. But Spurs have made stupid decision after stupid decision. And in this video, I'm going to lay out why I think a lot of that happens. I mean, I just don't see how the club has been managed with a cohesive vision. Bringing Conte in, but then also bringing in people like Jed Spence, really talented young players who then are sent off on loan when you need 28, 29-year-olds just makes absolutely no sense to me. The cohesive vision of building for the future and at the same time injecting yourselves with Conte doesn't make much sense. But at the same time, maybe it was the best they could do, and maybe it was a good stopover until a Nagelsmann or a Poch or someone like that was available. Every club, every team, every fan base has this feeling in their heart when they know a player or a manager should go. I had it when Brendan Rodgers should go, when Klopp was available. When a better offer comes along, sometimes you just need to grab it with both hands. But also, and I'm going to put it this way before we start the video properly, the grass is always greener. And sometimes I think it's great just to take a moment and go, what have we done here? What are we really building? And was what Conte said in any way pointing towards some changes that the club need to make? Whether Conte was pushed or whether he wanted to be pushed is almost irrelevant if he was lining himself up on the edge. So there you have it. Antonio Conte is finally confirmed to have been gone from Spurs. The big news that we've all been expecting, but also big news in the Premier League in general for the side that actually sit fourth in the Premier League or there and thereabouts. So what next? What next for everyone in this Spurs squad? What next for Daniel Levy and his merry band of men? And what next for Christian Stellini? And what next for Antonio Conte? Christian Stellini may take over for the rest of the season. It would be an unusual move to put in an assistant manager for the manager that people wanted to oust in the first place. But hey, we're dealing with Spurs here. And Antonio Conte pointed out a lot of the issues surrounding Spurs. And if you go and semantically highlight every one of Antonio Conte's words, sure, you can take them apart. You can say, hey, well, technically, Spurs did win something in the last 20 years. Sure. But technically, there was also so much that felt right about the sentiment of it and the frustration and the anger and the confusion of what Antonio Conte was saying in his very final press conference as Spurs manager that we all said, yeah, that scans actually, yeah, it makes perfect sense. And so this final move where they part by mutual consent also makes perfect sense. But what does that mean for Spurs? Well, it means they're on the hunt for another manager. It means that the injection that Antonio Conte gave their club may have worn off by now. And actually what you kind of need if you're going to take on Antonio Conte is wholesale buy-in. Buy-in from every facet of the clubs. Also a club where the structure is sort of set up to back Antonio Conte. We're not even talking about financially here. We're just talking about in terms of the whole mood, the whim, everything that Antonio Conte stands for, you also have to be willing to adjust and sort of stand for as well. That doesn't mean that you have to be a terrible person. Antonio Conte is not a terrible person. It means that you just have to change with him. But weirdly, with Spurs being such a progressive club, this kind of relic-like mentality, the stoicism, the anger, the hammer-like qualities that Antonio Conte brought with him felt so at odds to everything that Spurs have been used to over the last few years. And even that maybe a Mauricio Pochettino type had tried to embrace but also move with the soft hand of time, should we say. It took Pochettino time to change the club, but people bought in very quickly. It took Conte time to change the club, but people didn't really buy in at all. And there were moments of drama, but Antonio Conte is a very unique character, and so he is now gone. What he said resonated with me. I did feel it was a rare moment where a manager was honest about what he was feeling, about his assessment of a club. And I think it speaks about the bureaucracy of Spurs rather than anything else. Anyway, moving on. Conte is now old news according to Spurs, but his ghost will still sort of sit over them for the rest of the season, not only because he kind of took them to the brink of fourth anyway, put them in a really strong position, and then weirdly there was a mutiny when maybe there was an individual blowout moment. It was when he started to challenge the players. It was when he started to go against Richarlison and all these other guys, people who were quite moody, sort of, well, also quite powerful characters, considering Richarlison seems quite headstrong. He has his principles that he sticks by. And you can imagine if you offend one of these modern day players, they have enough money to basically say, I'm not actually going to bother for you. So See what you do now. Everyone still gets paid. And Antonio Conte sort of made that point, right? We're all getting paid for this. Are you trying to your maximum? Are you doing your job? Something maybe which doesn't resonate with modern players. But the next manager that comes in or the next manager that comes back will have to wrestle with all of this. Pochettino may be on his way back into the club. Nagelsmann has conveniently left Bayern. My goodness, if Nagelsmann went there, it would be insane. It would be amazing. In fact, he would be quite a perfect fit for Spurs, an aspiring team who've never quite hit the heights and want someone to represent upward thinking on their behalf, and maybe even better than a returning Pochettino. Because they say never go back to where you've been, right? They say never return to, a burning building, all these kind of things. Never return to try and undo or redo or do more of what you wanted to do. But there is a sentiment they want Poch back in a way. There is a sentiment from a lot of the Spurs players that they are only willing to do it in certain ways. And so Poch might know some of those. Or maybe Nagelsmann comes in and plays like apex football with his Spurs side. Nagelsmann was never really suited to Bayern. He might be suited to Spurs. Although who is suited to Spurs? An owner who seemingly has split the club quite a lot in recent years, though probably has split the club weirdly because he took them from obscurity to something, and then something started to actually mean something. When you are on the precipice of a title, then you sort of go, oh, now this actually means, what are you doing? I mean, there was a very different air around the club all of a sudden. And so the frustration that seeped out with it was weirdly kind of an entitled frustration from, well, we don't really know where. Because when you meet Spurs fans, they don't seem all that entitled. They just sort of seem titled. They don't seem to, Spurs fans kind of, yeah, here we are. We are sort of here. They don't strike me as a fan base who particularly look upward or a fan base particularly look downward, but they sort of just look around them and kind of want competition for the people around them, It's a bit strange, really, because it means that they sort of punch what is ever sort of right near them and kind of whatever seems to be attacking them at that moment, they kind of fight back to that. Liverpool fans have been on the end of that. Weirdly, Chelsea fans sometimes, like Arsenal fans, like there's a weird mentality that surrounds the club, which, I don't know, is kind of very Spursy in that sense. It makes them so easy to wind up as fans. It makes them so easy to kind of categorize. And it also kind of makes them quite easy to frustrate. Conte seemingly hadn't found a set of people that fit his mentality. Fine. Sometimes there are people who cross over and sometimes there aren't. But now you've had a few big managers, or busted flushes, as I saw them called the other day. What do? What are Spurs meant to do? They have so much great talent out there that they are paying so many high wages for on loan. They have one of the highest on loan values that I've seen. It's around 200 million, something crazy, right? That you think, surely if a manager is to come back and bring some of these players in with him, Jed Spence is out somewhere at the moment, and Ndombele is, there's all sorts of different pieces of talent speckled around Europe that if you were to bring them back in and pair them up with the summer signings that were so brilliant. That was one of the best summers that Spurs have had in a very long time, and one of the best recent summers in Premier League history, at least in terms of upgrades, names, technical ability, all these kind of things. You thought Spurs would be on the brink of something, but you worry that now they become a bit of a poison chalice. You worry that managers sort of look at that and go, are you going to hamstring me as an owner? Are you going to undermine me as players? I've seen you do it with Poch. I've seen you do it with Mourinho. I've seen you do it with Nunez. I've seen you do it with, now Conte. The reaction the players give is key now. Is it that it was Conte so personally and that he was just there to get them up to fitness levels and just there to get them up to motivation levels? And now he's something to kind of rail against. By the way, when you rail against something, you can only rail for a certain amount of time. So I hope that this momentum takes them to the end of the season for Spurs' sake, gets them over the line into fourth for Spurs' sake. Because if they ran out of gas early, the person to blame will not be Antonio Conte. The people to blame will be out on the pitch. The people to blame will be Daniel Levy. Not because blame is something you always attribute in football, but because the press look for that kind of people, other fans look for those kind of... other fans around the world go, that isn't good enough. You spent a lot of money. Other fans near them in Arsenal, Chelsea, all these teams go, we were behind you for a while and you still didn't manage to get so much further ahead of us. You hit a glass ceiling of sorts. Even Antonio Conte, the guy who won with Juve, even if you know what you know about Juve, the guy who won with Inter, even if you know what you know about Inter, the guy who couldn't quite get anyone across the line in the Champions League, so weirdly, why you're judging him on Champions League results is bizarre, but you get what I'm saying, right? Antonio Conte is gone, and that buffer zone that I think many managers acted as for quite some time at Spurs is wearing very thin. The next guy who comes in, sure, he'll get a lot of time, I think. I think he'll get like a lot of leeway, but I'm not sure the players do. Because every one of these managers has been top class. Sure, Mourinho may be on a downward trend, but still top class. Conte may be plateauing, but on a top class level. The players just haven't responded to any of these guys. Now, maybe that's because they've gone for certain aspects that Pochettino represented that other managers haven't. Maybe that's what makes Nagelsmann such a good move. He is so modern. His soft skills are very different to those of Conte and Mourinho, much closer to a Pochettino type. He is a modern manager, one who has succeeded in England in a more recent year. So maybe that is the guy that you go for. But in the short term, Spurs have to get that top four. Spurs have to try and keep Harry Kane. And if they sit in this stasis for much longer, then Kane has a decision. Either you stay and you are basically condemned to being a Spurs legend, which is good, but you're not winning anything. Or you go and there's a real chance of a title. But when you go, bear this in mind. Conte had frustrated a lot of players at Spurs. Conte had disenfranchised a lot of players at Spurs. Conte had basically tried to make the club into a Conte-shaped mould, and with that, a lot of Spurs players were downhearted, not happy. His methods can sometimes be quite dividing. So with that, there may be a motivated gang of players that want to succeed with or without Harry Kane. A gang of players who don't think that Kane is the only thing and actually probably think they're playing too much towards Kane's strengths, especially under someone like Antonio Conte. Just look at the man's tactics. Quite basic, quite two-dimensional at times, although he could go toe-to-toe with some of the best. Sometimes he was also completely found out and found to be very unmotivated of the players. It's this perfect balance. The motivation meets the formation, meets the how can I get these guys to move how I want? And if your methods aren't modern enough, we just ain't doing it. So, what next for Spurs? Do they get top four? Does this play into Newcastle's hands, Liverpool's hands, Chelsea's hands, anyone else who's chasing top four? Is this great for United because they can just, poof, extend their lead over this Spurs gang? Conte, you're a legend of English football. I don't think you just did it on the back of Mourinho. I don't just think you did it on the back of others. I think you are a great manager in your own right. And I think everything you said about Spurs was very revealing, if not 100% accurate. So, let me know in the comments below, where do you guys go from here? Where did Spurs go? Where did Conte go? Where does the team go? What does Stellini do? He has been nothing but an assistant manager. He's had a couple of stints as manager, but his successful things have been as Conte's assistant manager since 2011. That's over 10 years. That's over a decade of being the same person. It's not to say he's not his own man, but let's look at the mould he comes in. I'm interested to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below, and I'll chat to you in a while. Much love. Bye.